we're going to move on to our next chat here, which is going to be with Ben West from the Gitcoin team. Of course, this chat's going to be called Beyond the Merge, Blockchains Enabled Climate Solutions. I think everybody obviously should hopefully know in this chat that, in the last couple, I guess the last week, actually, it's only been a week, Ethereum has received a massive upgrade called the Merge, which has dramatically changed its kind of climate footprint. Obviously, we're all really excited about that, and I think it bears repeating ad nauseum until people really kind of realize how amazingly impactful that moment was for Ethereum as a climate perspective. I think Ben's probably going to talk about more of it, so I'm not going to jump in all over it. But yeah, without further ado, maybe I'll invite Ben up to the stage here to unmute and share his camera and his screen. And yeah, welcome to the stream, Ben.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here. Hey,
Pleasure.
Jacob.
And yeah, maybe I'll just turn it over to you. I mean, we have I don't want to talk too much about probably stuff you're already going to talk about. So, but I'm super excited to have you here and excited to learn more about what you're going to chat about.
Well, thank you, sir. I definitely will talk about the Merge, and we'll also talk about blockchain-enabled climate solutions. So why don't I just go ahead and share my screen? So beyond the Merge, we have talked a fair amount as a community about the significance of this moment. I just want to start with this graphic from a piece that The Economist did about the Merge, which had the kind of bizarre title of Farewell to the Netherlands. But, I think this little chart that they integrated really tells the story of the reduction of energy consumption and related greenhouse gas emissions from that moment where the Merge happened. That line going straight down is not something you see very often. It's pretty significant. And the idea of farewell to the Netherlands is basically saying, that the amount of energy being consumed by the Ethereum blockchain and by all of us using it, is dropped by 99.95%, or, the equivalent of something like the Netherlands or Sweden or Chile would be another sort of comparable example. Of course, there's a range of different estimates about what that energy consumption looks like. But sort of the high end or most conservative, I guess you could call it, estimate, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 million tons a year, which would be the equivalent of the Netherlands or Chile or Sweden. So, really significant. And I think it's important that we kind of recognize the significance of that. And I'll talk a little bit more about it in a sec. But first, just for the sake of introducing sort of myself and kind of how I fit into this conversation, my name's Ben. As you heard, I work for Gitcoin. I've also been doing a little bit of research on behalf of the Ethereum Foundation around blockchain-enabled climate solutions. So I'm kind of wearing a couple of different hats here. But I'm going to focus a lot of the sort of use cases that I'm going to talk about today on projects that have actually come through the Gitcoin climate rounds in the last 4 rounds. And I know Scott was here earlier talking and probably talked a bit about Gitcoin, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about what Gitcoin is, but for anybody who isn't familiar, you can definitely go check out gitcoin.co and you'll find lots of information there. For the last 4 rounds of our quarterly grants rounds, we've run a climate solutions round. We've now got over 250 projects in that round, which is just mind-boggling. We had 26 in the first round we ran. It's definitely the cutting edge of climate solutions projects. I've worked in the climate space for over 20 years, mostly in the environmental nonprofit side, but I've also done clean energy plans and public consultations at the city and provincial level in Canada. It's a space that I think is just really, really exciting. I haven't seen this many people this excited about anything to do with climate solutions in many years. It's become really a testing ground for new ideas, and actually a place where a lot of VCs and others kind of go to look at what has the interest in the sort of what harnesses the wisdom of the crowds to really sort of show that its value in this space. So I'll kind of walk you through a variety of different sort of use cases and approaches that are enabled by blockchain technology. I think we're at a pretty interesting moment now where a lot of people are going to start paying attention to what's possible with blockchain technology, who may have hesitated or taken a small sort of step back. just because of concerns around energy consumption as it related to sort of, using blockchain for climate solutions. Perhaps, they won't be as concerned now. I also want to just recognize the contribution of our matching fund partners. It really is our partners who make it possible for Gitcoin grants rounds to be a reality. And we've had a lot of different really exciting partners come on board in the last little while. And it's really a mix of, Web3 projects, many of them graduates of Gitcoin funding, folks who got their start, inside of Gitcoin, and also, increasingly some folks who are kind of a step removed from Web3, but are sort of dipping a toe in the space, folks like Kimball Musk and Schmidt Futures, Eric Schmidt's foundation, and others who are starting to get actively involved. So really cool to see how this kind of mixture of partners from across the Web3 ecosystems, as well as, increasingly folks who have an interest in climate solutions more broadly, or in Web3 specifically, starting to get involved. So, really the first thing that we end up talking about when we talk about, these use cases is the idea of getting rid of middlemen, putting money directly in the hands of people. When I talk to people that are building on Web3 technology, on blockchains, it's really this kind of fundamental principle of blockchains that is the first thing that brings people to the table. It's this idea of reducing the need to sort of pay rent-seeking individuals in the middle of transactions, that just opens the door to a whole world of potential innovation. And I would say that is kind of the first piece, and then often we end up talking about composability and interoperability, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But just as a starting point, one of the really beautiful things to see happen, has been kind of both on the side of helping when there's problems, and this has been the case for, funding going to folks in Pakistan with the Save Pakistan Crypto collective, but also, we've seen it in terms of, things like support for folks in the Ukraine, and of course, millions of dollars has gone directly to, both the government in the Ukraine, but also to a lot of different groups on the ground doing good work, and just being able to, put money directly in the hands of people where it's needed, is I would say kind of the starting point for this conversation, kind of beyond the merge. Now that we've seen this massive reduction in energy consumption, and by the way, I think it's worth pointing out that the merge is probably the biggest reduction in energy consumption from any industry in the modern era of human history. I really am, I've tried to think of anything comparable in terms of sort of the amount of energy reduction, and had a hard time thinking of another example. Really, the closest thing would actually be the actions of countries, not the actions of industries or companies. That reduction in annual energy consumption is super significant. And, as Ethereum continues to grow, of course, that, the emissions would have continued to grow along with it. So, it's not only a reduction in potential energy consumption right now, but if we look at that, if Ethereum gets 10x or 100x in terms of the amount of use, the amount of value that's being derived, the associated emissions are not going to go up with it, which is really an admirable thing. And I want to just, for any ETH core devs who are out there listening, I just want to give my personal thank you for that contribution. It really is significant and historic. So both in terms of direct funding to projects where there's a problem that we're trying to solve, where we're like looking at climate adaptation, but also, on the mitigation side, just getting money directly in the hands of people trying to do good things. Like, for example, this group, Iwaka Uganda, who's been a grantee on the Gitcoin platform. They've said that, really without Gitcoin, it would have been very hard for them to do what they're doing. It's given them the ability to plant trees, install solar panels, in schools and health centers, all throughout, the area that they're doing their work. And this is just a couple of examples, but, it's kind of the first use case of what the implications of removing middlemen can look like on the ground. The next use case that I'm going to point to is one that I think is, really exciting, actually, and probably one of the lesser known and understood, and one of the areas where I think there may actually be the most opportunity or significant amounts of opportunity. So first of all, using the composability and interoperability of various different tools that are built in the sort of DeFi space has opened up this door to direct financing of solar energy projects or other clean energy projects. And I'm just highlighting a couple of them on the screen here, who are grantees from the Gitcoin grants round. Projects like Village Grid, or Zero Labs, or Make Change Possible, all at different scales and different locations, are actually using these DeFi protocols, these kind of lending platforms, borrowing platforms, different forms of decentralized financing, so that people can directly contribute to funding solar projects on the ground. And in particular, I want to give a shout out to the Solar Foundation, which is a group that's trying to harness these mechanisms to directly fund projects actually for Iowa, Uganda, as well as for people in Puerto Rico more recently, in basically an attempt to try to bring more resilience and the ability to, basically have your own microgrids at the local level, with the help of, these kind of funding mechanisms. And what they're doing also ties into the folks at Zero Labs, who are using renewable energy credits as a way to go about doing this kind of work. This is kind of the equivalent of carbon offsets, but for renewable energy. So, where you can actually buy, credits for a certain amount of electricity consumption. And I think these are really interesting and sort of novel approaches to bringing more liquidity directly into these markets and to make these kinds of projects a reality. And it's worth pointing out that, that these are investments that can generate a stable return over a period of time, and it's really beautiful to see how that capital can sort of find a home and more efficiently just actually make these projects a reality on the ground. So some really interesting work happening in that regard. I also put up this group 7 Energy, which is a company in Norway, or I should say it's an organization in Norway, that's using what I would call a sort of forward-thinking policy to facilitate community energy. Like, they're actually using blockchain technology for decentralized grid management. And that's similar to what Village Grid does as well, to basically make it possible for people to buy and sell electricity directly from each other. I think that this is one of those things where the potential for it is exponential, but it also has barriers in the so-called meat space. So luckily in Norway, there's policies that really make it difficult for electricity providers, the folks that own the grid infrastructure. It makes it hard for them to limit the ability of communities to do this. And in some cases where people would like to see things like this happen, they run into obstacles with regulators. There are some examples, though, that are not at the community level even, but even just at the individual building level. In the process of the research I've been doing, I actually found a company based right here in Toronto, where I am, in the birthplace of Ethereum. Shout out to Toronto. Who have actually been using blockchain technology to facilitate microgrids at the condominium level. The charging infrastructure for electric vehicles usually is kind of a one-way process. You're pulling electricity off of that charger, you're paying a fee. But what is being made possible by this company in Toronto is that they're actually making it possible to actually sell your electricity back into the condominium complex. So, the electricity that you've got stored in your battery, for most people, their automobile isn't being used over 90% of the time. That can now become a backup battery. And if you imagine that at scale in a condo complex, imagine, the entire underground parking being filled with vehicles that have electric batteries in them. And I think increasingly in the years ahead, we're going to see more and more vehicles where that's the case, especially as people are seeing costs rise around the world for gas. It just becomes increasingly an opportunity for that parking garage to now become basically like a backup battery bank, and that can be useful in the case of blackouts. But it can also really help with moments of peak demand. In a lot of jurisdictions, when you are at kind of peak parts of the day, people are charged more for electricity because there's such a demand on the grid. And that can also result in using natural gas or coal-fired power plants that may not run all the time, but are sort of used as a backup source of electricity. Now, if you can sort of manage that more efficiently, and actually draw power from batteries that are within a building, not only are you creating a new revenue stream for those automobile owners, but you're also potentially creating, the ability to reduce that sort of additional demand on the grid itself during those kind of peak moments. So yeah, I think the financing of clean energy and the facilitating of decentralized grids is a totally fascinating and very rich, ripe opportunity for innovation. I think in some locations we're seeing kind of the equivalent of what happened in the global south when people just jumped right over landlines and went right to cell phones. I think we may see the same thing happen with these microgrids and distributed grids facilitated by blockchain technology, where we'll actually see solutions popping up that were financed perhaps by micro loans from a whole bunch of different people on the other side of the world, who are all getting a little bit of return from the money that's being generated by selling that electricity between neighbors, and also opportunities for whether it be local farmers and business owners and others who are renting out their rooftops or their land to facilitate these projects to generate some income that they may not have had otherwise. So really a win-win scenario, and something that just wouldn't be possible in the same sort of way with the same sort of transparency, clarity, and all the stuff that comes with the interoperability of all these various different DeFi protocols and tools plugging into this space. Probably the most commonly known use case for blockchain technology in the kind of climate space is around the tokenization of carbon and other ecological assets. Carbon offsetting is a very common approach taken by governments and companies to reduce their greenhouse gas footprint. Basically, the hope is that companies will do everything that they can to reduce their emissions, or so will countries. But then if they're trying to reach a certain goal, often they'll buy offsets to help sort of fill the gap. And this is definitely the space where we see the biggest number of projects who are using blockchain technology, again, to bring additional liquidity, to sort of build on top of these various different DeFi protocols, and to create what people are calling the refi space, the regenerative finance space. That takes a lot of different shapes and sizes. I kind of showed a cross section of a bunch of different interesting and innovative projects. Senkin in the middle of the screen here has created a dashboard that is kind of a clearinghouse for all kinds of different offsets, that tells the stories of the projects, that helps to draw attention to the sort of different approaches that are being taken and the projects that are being directly financed. Of course, the beauty of doing these kinds of projects enabled by blockchain technology is that it just opens up a whole world of possibilities in terms of cutting out middlemen again. One of the biggest costs of doing carbon offsets is actually the validation and verification. And I'll talk about that in a second, but really even just at the surface level, knowing how much is being paid, knowing whether an offset has actually, occurred, all of that is stuff that's especially enabled by blockchain technology. And just because of the sort of ease of use of many of these protocols, brings a lot more liquidity into the space, which is really a big part of what's needed in the carbon offset space, is to just bring in more demand, which will then generate more and more of these projects actually occurring in the real world. So I also included a couple of other projects like Endangered Token or Neptune Chain, who are trying to look at other ecological assets like forest preservation, or the sustainability of the marine environment. Regen Foundation and the Regen Network is a really interesting project, and really a set of projects being built on top of a protocol that I think is really worth checking out. Doing some very interesting stuff in terms of looking at ecological value, and also using their own standards to bring offsets directly on chain, as opposed to some other projects that are using pre-existing offsets and tokenizing them, which is basically can be very effective, but also has some limiting barriers when say a group decides to not allow that activity to take place, as is kind of the ongoing conversation right now with Vera, the biggest voluntary carbon offset market right now. Also just want to give a quick shout out to Return Protocol. Really cool project that just allows you to set and forget offsets directly in your wallet. So you can just basically set up a certain percentage of every transaction to go towards carbon offsets, and you can just make that happen very easily. And of course, as I think everybody is well aware, user experience is one of the most important things for us to be wrestling with in the years ahead. Cool to see projects that are just trying to make it as easy as possible. So I'm not going to mention all these projects. Spirals and Refi South also doing great stuff. But as I tend to do, I'm noticing I got a lot of slides and only not as much time as I could talk endlessly about this. So the next piece of this that I think really is important, and it connects to the conversation around asset or offsets, is the world of monitoring, reporting, and verification, or MRV. Tracking emissions, is definitely super important, and verifying impact is super important. And oracles have become a big part of conversation around blockchain technology in recent years. There's some great projects like Astral and Shamba who are trying to use oracles to help with the verification of offsets. So like if somebody makes a claim that they're protecting a piece of forest, how do you know? And part of the way you can do that is using satellite data. Weather data also becomes very important. And even in some cases, even putting monitoring devices directly in the soil or at a farm can bring that information on chain and be used as a sort of an additional layer in that stack of technology that can help actually verify the validity of emission reductions. And Shamba is already using this technology to help bring new revenue to farmers in various places in Kenya and elsewhere in Africa. Really exciting to see what they're doing. I also want to give a shout out to Blockchain for Climate Foundation. They're big fans of Ethereum. So, if you don't know them already, you should definitely check them out. They've been around for many years, run by a guy named Joseph, who I've known for many years in Vancouver. Super lovely guy. And, they have been trying to bring the Paris Agreement, the greenhouse gas reduction agreement, onto the Ethereum blockchain for many years, and meeting with a lot of politicians and others. But really at its core, I think it's important to understand that using blockchain to actually do the carbon accounting in a transparent way is fundamentally a very important and useful attribute of what blockchain can bring to the climate space. Already the government of Canada, British Columbia, and many other places in the world are experimenting with this. It's much needed. There's a real lack of standardization of how greenhouse gas accounting is done in terms of how the information is shared. There's a hodgepodge of databases and spreadsheets that are floating around out there in the world, and it's very hard to wrap your head around exactly what's being done in that space. So I'm actually very excited about that sort of overarching, like, how do we use blockchain technology just for the monitoring of greenhouse gases and climate impacts, as well as that sort of more on the ground monitoring of specific projects that are making claims, if we're going to pass our money to folks, having that sort of level of verification. In short, I think blockchain could actually basically solve some of the biggest problems with carbon offsets. Logistics and supply chain efficiency is probably the least sexy and potentially one of the most important uses of blockchain technology in terms of reducing energy. A tremendous amount of energy use goes into the movement of goods around the world. Already big companies like Maersk and others are using blockchains, in their case, I think private blockchains. But increasingly, we're seeing, how this can be super, super important in this space. And the graphic that I included here is from the folks at the Rocky Mountain Institute, who are doing some really interesting work in this regard. Also, a shout out should go to the folks from Filecoin Green, who are doing some very important work in this space as well, around sort of attestations and different ways of sort of monitoring impact. And folks who have had a lot of experience working directly in this space. So each one of these pieces I could spend an hour talking about, but let's just say that logistics and supply chain efficiency, super important, and another really exciting opportunity in the blockchain space to really have an impact. Finally, the last use case that I'm going to highlight is actually community arts and culture projects. Culture does not change all by itself. And this is one of the things that, that we fund through Gitcoin grants rounds that I think is kind of underrated in its importance. On this page, there's a bunch of different interesting projects. One of them is a video game. One of them is a documentary. Reef DAO, who has the cutest name in all of crypto. I always just call them Reef DAO because I get confused, but they're trying to protect the Great Barrier Reef by making a digital twin of the Great Barrier Reef in sort of a metaversal space where you can buy portions of the reef, and it'll finance researchers who are making 3D models of the Great Barrier Reef using some innovative new underwater cameras. And really, to be honest, it was the first time that I really got excited about the metaverse as much as I'm into games and whatever else. I hadn't really seen the implications of a metaversal space as part of climate solutions. ReFi DAO is doing some really interesting stuff. There's also a lot of different conferences and educational programs like Open Campus that are seeing funding coming in. Hibiscus DAO is a group that's looking at standardization for reducing energy consumption in the fashion industry using blockchain technology. That's their logo up in the top right corner. And some just amazing artists. For anybody who pays attention to Gitcoin, you've probably heard us talk about solar punk art. Definitely one of the coolest things that I see happening in the space is just kind of this visioning of how the world could be. And I think that, the more that we have that conversation, get people excited about the real world use cases that we talked about today, but then sort of imagine what it looks like in our day-to-day lives. I think that's what it's going to take to really start changing people's perception and understanding of the value of this kind of technology. So I just wanted to sort of end off with this idea of, just one last thing about Gitcoin, which is, people say, I've got a friend named Pranav from ReFi South who says people come to Gitcoin for the funding, but they stick around for the community. And, I think that really is the secret sauce of the Web3 space in general and Gitcoin in particular. The interoperability and composability of our tools really leads to this, collaborative space where people support each other. It's been very exciting to watch these projects over the last 4 grants rounds evolve and grow, and collaborate, learn in public. Sometimes things work, sometimes things don't, but we all, kind of take big steps in the right direction as the result of that kind of approach. So I just, I love seeing these kind of quotes from various different people in the community about the experiences that they had with Gitcoin. To me, it's really just amazing to sort of watch this evolve and grow. If you haven't checked out any of our Twitter spaces, we've done a bunch of these shill spaces for folks in the climate space, as well as just others on Gitcoin. And it's been really exciting to sort of see all these different projects come and share what they're working on, and often make new relationships in real time. And, sometimes people find co-founders, or they find developers, or they find funders, or they just learn about, something interesting that's going on somewhere else in the world. So that's definitely a very cool part of what you see happening day to day at Gitcoin. And I'll just leave it there and say, I would love to talk to anybody who is interested in what could be done in this space, or is curious to learn more about this space. I threw my Twitter handle and my Telegram up there. Feel free to come and, find me and talk more about, what is possible in the Web3 climate solutions space. So thanks for the time to chat about all this stuff.
Thanks for being here, Ben. Really appreciate that. And I think awesome overview of just like all the different kind of things that are happening in the space and what's been made possible. I know we're a little bit over, but I kind of want to ask a couple of questions
Sure.
that come into mind. And if anybody has any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat as well. But yeah, I mean, now that we've kind of done this major improvement, as you mentioned, to kind of like, I guess, wipe the energy efficiency or the energy usage of the Netherlands off the map. And Ethereum's usage now is like, I think more representative of like the volume of what it should be. Like, given that all other climate solutions and things that are happening on chain exist, like, is there a way where we could like measure that impact in a way where maybe Ethereum could almost be like carbon, not even just carbon neutral, but also like carbon negative? Is there a way where we could kind of get to that point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some things are easier to count than others, but definitely the offset protocols and the renewable energy credits, many of those projects actually have dashboards. A big shout out to the folks for ETH for Climate, which is kind of a new coalition that's just recently come together, that's actually talking about offsetting historic emissions from the Ethereum blockchain. which I think is a noble and worthwhile activity. For me, the bigger picture really is just like, how do we make Ethereum a massively positive contributor to climate solutions, regardless of just historic emissions, but also like kind of beyond the emissions calculations, and things like carbon accounting, for example. It's kind of hard to quantify what the impact of that is, just having better information in the hands of people more readily, or things like their arts and culture projects, again, sort of harder to quantify. But definitely there are a lot of ways that we can use blockchain technology to monitor, the impact of all of these projects. And I'll give a shout out to the folks at Zero Labs and to the folks at KlimaDAO, who both have some great dashboards already that they're experimenting with. And anybody who wants to take a look can go find the Discord for ETH for Climate, and you'll see a lot of that conversation happening there.
Amazing. And then maybe one last really quick thing that comes to mind for me, like you mentioned, historical Ethereum. I think it's like to your point about earlier in the presentation about how like you can't think of any like proxy or equivalent to like that much kind of energy usage being kind of like flipped off in a switch outside of maybe government policies and stuff like that. Like it is a big change, and I think like there is a large kind of consensus almost that had formed during the proof of work days of Ethereum that like it is energy inefficient. It's part of the kind of battle against climate change, that like we need to go up against Ethereum, not work with it. I mean, you probably spend a lot of time, chatting with different people that maybe, aren't as, maybe kind of in the know as kind of the group of people that are probably watching this. But like, what have you seen as like a really good way to sort of reverse that narrative now that like we really truly have done that with technology? How do we now do that with kind of the more social aspect of it?
That's a really good question. And honestly, I think it's the storytelling around projects and use cases. That old saying, sell the sizzle, not the steak. I think because we're such like a developer heavy space and still quite early in the sort of building out of tools, I think there's kind of an emphasis on talking about the how everything works instead of the sort of why it's useful. And I think like for most people, really all they understand is kind of the payments or the sort of investment components of this. So my hope is that just by like telling these stories of these innovative projects and the really interesting things they're doing with this technology, and showing why that couldn't just be done, with a set of Excel spreadsheets or, some traditional database structure, or how that, the removal of middlemen, takes a bunch of rent-seeking activity out of the mix and puts more money directly in the hands of people. Or even things like the electric charging station in buildings in the city that I live in. To me, like you don't even need to know that there's blockchain under the hood there making that work. But maybe when you do learn that, then you'll have sort of a different view of this technology. I can tell you, I've talked to a lot of climate-oriented organizations and individuals, over the years. From working in the space for many years, but since I've been working at Gitcoin and even before as a person with an interest in crypto. And I've been telling a lot of people, like, let's just keep having this conversation after the merge, because like people have been a little bit reticent, but, sort of interested in what was possible. And I think there's going to be a big influx of people showing up who are sort of maybe now open to seeing what is possible in this space. And that's really exciting to me.
Amazing. Well, appreciate your time, Ben. I'm also a fellow Torontonian, funny enough, and I had no idea that those chargers in my condo building are connected to a blockchain. So maybe I'll message you after to try to figure out what's going on there. But really a pleasure to have you here, Ben, and thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. That was a lot of fun. Cheers.
Cheers.